I was getting ready to go to my daughter's house for dinner when my lawyer texted me, "Just call me immediately." I dialed her number. What she told me about my new son-in-law shocked me. Before we continue, I just want to say thank you for taking the time to hear my story. If you're comfortable, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. Now let me tell you my story. The late afternoon sun cast long, peaceful shadows across the polished hardwood floors of my study. It was a Friday, a day that, in the 2 years since my retirement, had come to hold a quiet, sacred quality. This was my time, a time for reflection, for reading, for the simple, unhurried pleasure of being. I, Judge Evelyn Hayes, a woman who had spent 40 years in the loud, often chaotic, and always demanding world of the judiciary, had finally learned the beautiful, intricate language of silence. My home was my sanctuary, a place of quiet, orderly grace, each book on its shelf, each piece of art on its wall, a testament to a life built on a foundation of logic, reason, and a deep, abiding respect for the truth. I was in the middle of wrapping a small gift, a first edition of a collection of poems by Gwendolyn Brooks, a treasure I had found for my daughter Chloe. She and her new husband Jonathan were expecting me for dinner, a weekly tradition that had become the new, warm center of my retired life. I is still getting to know Jonathan, but my initial impressions were ones of cautious optimism. He was handsome, intelligent, and utterly devoted to my daughter. He had a kind of polished, international charm about him, a product, he had explained, of a career spent as a business consultant in Europe. He made my Chloe happy, and her happiness after the loss of her father 10 years prior was the most important thing in the world to me. Her laughter, a sound I had not heard with such genuine, uncomplicated joy in a very long time, was a balm to my own weary, widowed soul. I finished tying the ribbon on the gift, my hands moving with the same meticulous care I had once applied to reviewing a legal brief. I looked at the clock on my mantel, a beautiful old grandfather clock that had been my husband's pride and joy. It was time to get ready. I stood up, my joints protesting with the quiet creak of age, and as I did, my phone, which had been sitting silently on my desk, buzzed with an incoming text message. I glanced at it, expecting it to be Chloe, perhaps asking me to pick up a bottle of wine on my way over. But the name on the screen was not my daughter's, it was Aisha Clark, my lawyer. Aisha was more than just my lawyer, she was my protégée, my legacy. A brilliant, fiercely intelligent young woman whom I had mentored since she was a law student. She was now a partner at one of the most prestigious firms in the city. She was not a woman given to casual chatter or unnecessary communication. Our interactions were like everything else in my life, efficient, professional, and to the point. The text message, however, was none of those things. It was a stark, jarring, and completely uncharacteristic command, a string of 5 words in all caps, that seemed to vibrate with a sense of barely suppressed panic. "Judge Hayes? Call me, immediately." The text was a stone thrown through the stained glass window of my peaceful afternoon. My heart, which had been beating with a slow, contented rhythm, gave a sudden, hard lurch. Aisha would never address me with such raw, undisguised urgency unless something was terribly, catastrophically wrong. My mind, the old, practiced judicial mind, began to race, sifting through the possibilities, each one more terrifying than the last. Had something happened to my investments? Was there a problem with my estate? Or the thought a cold, coiling serpent of fear in my gut? Had something happened to Chloe? I walked back to my desk, my hand trembling slightly as I picked up the phone and I dialed her number. The phone call was a descent into a nightmare. Aisha answered on the first ring, her voice a tense, strained version of its usual confident cadence. "Evelyn," she said, dispensing with the usual professional formalities, her use of my first name a clear and immediate signal of the gravity of the situation. "Thank you for calling me back. Are you sitting down? Are you alone?" "I am, Aisha," I said, my own voice now tight with a new, cold dread. "What is it? What's happened?" "It's about Jonathan," she said, and the world seemed to narrow to the sound of her voice in my ear. "Jonathan Turner, your new son-in-law." She took a deep, steadying breath. "As you know, as part of the process of updating your estate plan to include Chloe's marriage, I took the liberty of running a standard deep-dive background check on him. It's a routine practice I do for all my high-net-worth clients, just to ensure there are no surprises. I expected it to be a formality." She paused, and in that small, silent space, I could feel a terrible, life-altering truth gathering its weight. "Evelyn," she said, her voice dropping to a low, serious whisper, "the man your daughter married, he doesn't exist." I sank into my leather desk chair, my legs suddenly unable to support me. "What do you mean, he doesn't exist?" I asked, the words a stupid nonsensical echo of her own. The name Jonathan Turner is a ghost. Aisha explained, her voice now a rapid-fire delivery of cold, hard and devastating facts. There is no record of him, no birth certificate, no social security number, no university records from the London school he claims to have attended. The entire identity is a complete and total fabrication, a very sophisticated one, but a fabrication nonetheless. I listened, my mind, the mind that had been trained to assess facts and weigh evidence, struggling to process the sheer breathtaking scale of the deception. It was not just a lie, it was a complete erasure of a non-existent person. But, who is he? I managed to ask, my voice a hoarse whisper. That, Aisha said, her voice now filled with a grim, terrible certainty, is where it gets worse. I had to use some, less conventional methods to find the truth. I had to hire a private investigator who specializes in financial fraud. We were able to trace his digital footprint, the one he tried so hard to erase. His real name is Daniel Allen, and he is a professional. He is a highly sophisticated con artist, who preys on successful, lonely women. The rest of her words were a torrent of ugly, unbelievable truths. She told me of the other marriages, in other states, under other names. A wealthy doctor in Texas, a successful tech entrepreneur in California, a widowed art gallery owner in New York. The pattern was always the same. He would sweep them off their feet with his charm and his fabricated history. He would slowly, methodically, isolate them from their families and their friends. He would gain control of their finances, and then he would disappear, leaving them in a state of emotional and financial ruin. He's a predator, Evelyn, Ayesha finished, her voice a low, anger growl. And your daughter, she's not his target. You are. Her marriage to Chloe, it's just the first move in his game. The end game is your estate. The phone call ended, but the silence that followed was filled with the screaming, undeniable truth. The charming, handsome man, who was at this very moment waiting for me to arrive for dinner, the man my daughter loved with her entire trusting heart, was a monster, and he was coming for me. In the immediate aftermath of the phone call, my first instinct was that of a mother. A raw, primal and overwhelming urge to protect my child. I wanted to get in my car, to race to my daughter's house, to burst through the door and expose the monster she had married, to physically drag her away from him and back to the safety of my own home. I was a lioness, and my cub was in the lair of a jackal. But then, after the first hot wave of maternal panic receded, another colder and far more familiar instinct took over. It was the instinct of the judge. 40 years on the bench had taught me that raw, emotional reactions, no matter how justified, are almost always a tactical error. To rush in with accusations and evidence would be to show my hand too early. Jonathan, or Daniel, or whatever his real name was a professional. He would have a dozen plausible lies ready to deploy. He would twist my accusations into the paranoid ramblings of a jealous, overprotective mother. He would paint me as the villain, the crazy old woman who was trying to destroy her daughter's newfound happiness. And Chloe, my sweet, loving and completely besotted Chloe, would believe him. I would not just fail to save her, I would drive her further into his arms, and I would have alerted him that I was onto him, making him even more dangerous, more unpredictable. No, this could not be a frantic emotional confrontation. This had to be a case. I had to be a judge, not a mother. I had to gather my own intelligence, observe the subject, and build an unshakable, irrefutable case that even my own, love-blind daughter would not be able to deny. I took a series of slow, deep and steadying breaths, forcing the frantic, terrified mother back into her cage, and allowing the calm, methodical and utterly ruthless judge to take her place at the forefront of my mind. I looked at the clock. It was almost 6. I was expected for dinner at 7. My decision was instantaneous, and it was absolute. I would go. I would walk into the lion's den. I would sit at his table, I would eat his food, and I would do it with a mask of serene maternal warmth so perfect that even he, a master of deception, would not see the cold, calculating fury that lay beneath it. The drive to their house, a drive I had made 100 times with a heart full of love and anticipation, was now a journey into enemy territory. My hands as I gripped the steering wheel of my car were perfectly steady. My mind was a cool, quiet, and orderly space, a courtroom where a case was already being built. I reviewed the facts as Aisha had presented them, the alias, the other marriages, the pattern of financial devastation. Each fact was a piece of evidence, a brick in the wall of his guilt. My mission tonight was to gather my own evidence, not of his past crimes, but of his present intentions. I needed to see his methods for myself. I needed to understand the specific nature of the trap he was setting for me. I was no longer going to dinner with my son-in-law. I was conducting a covert, in-person surveillance of a dangerous criminal suspect, and I was about to become the most dangerous and unsuspecting witness he had ever encountered. The house was, as always, a picture of perfect, minimalist elegance. Jonathan had a decorator's eye, a talent for creating spaces that were both beautiful and emotionally sterile. My daughter Chloe met me at the door, her face alight with a pure, uncomplicated joy that was now almost painful for me to witness. She hugged me, her embrace warm and genuine, and for a heartbreaking moment, she was my little girl again, and the world was a safe and simple place. "Mom, you're here," she said, her voice full of a happiness that was, I now knew, built on a foundation of the most profound and terrible lies. "Jonathan's just opening the wine. He made your favorite, coq au vin." I returned her hug, my own arms a cage of false protective warmth. "That sounds wonderful, sweetheart," I said, my voice a perfect, serene imitation of a happy mother. I walked into the open-plan living room, and there he was. Jonathan, the monster. He was standing by the sleek modern fireplace, a bottle of expensive wine in his hand, a look of warm, welcoming charm on his handsome face. He looked at me, and his smile was a masterpiece of practiced sincerity. "Evelyn," he said, his voice a smooth, confident baritone. "So good to see you. I hope the traffic wasn't too bad." He walked over and kissed my cheek, a gesture of familial intimacy that now felt like a violation, a cold reptilian touch. The dinner was a masterclass in dramatic irony, a long, surreal and deeply terrifying performance. I sat at their beautiful candlelit table, and I played my part. I complimented the food. I asked about their week. I listened with a serene maternal smile, as Jonathan recounted a series of charming and completely fabricated anecdotes about his recent business trip to Zurich. He was a brilliant performer, I had to admit. His stories were filled with a wealth of specific, plausible details, his lies a seamless, elegant tapestry of deception. He was not just a con man, he was an artist, and his medium was the truth. Chloe, of course, was his enraptured audience. She hung on his every word, her eyes shining with admiration for her brilliant, worldly husband. And I, the silent, watching judge, saw the performance for what it was. I saw the subtle, almost imperceptible tells of the liar, the slight hesitation before he answered a direct question, the way his eyes would briefly lose focus as he was constructing the next level of his fiction, the way his charm seemed to become more intense, more focused, whenever he sensed a moment of potential doubt. He was a predator, and his charm was not a personality trait, it was a tool, a carefully honed weapon he used to disarm his victims. I was not just eating dinner with a liar, I was dining with the devil, and I was taking note. The first move, the first subtle probe of my defenses came with dessert. Chloe had made a lemon tart, my favorite, and as she was serving it, Jonathan with a casual offhand air began to lay the first stone of his trap. He started by talking about the market, about the recent volatility, about the uncertainty of the global economy. It was the kind of talk one might hear on any financial news channel, plausible, intelligent and designed to create a subtle atmosphere of anxiety. He then, with a masterful, seamless transition, turned the conversation to me. "You know, Evelyn," he said, his voice a perfect mixture of respect and gentle concern, "I was thinking the other day about your own finances. A judicial pension is a wonderful thing, so stable, so secure, but in this kind of inflationary environment, I worry that it's too conservatively managed. You're leaving a lot of potential growth on the table." I took a small, deliberate bite of my lemon tart, the sweet, sharp taste a welcome distraction from the cold, clinical reality of what was happening. He was beginning. This was the opening move of his long, patient game. He was not making a direct play for my money. He was far too sophisticated for that. He was simply planting a seed of doubt, of fear, positioning himself as the wise, benevolent advisor who could help me navigate the dangerous, confusing world of modern finance. "I've always been a cautious investor, Jonathan," I said, my voice a placid, untroubled calm. "My husband and I, we believed in slow, steady growth." "It's a bit old-fashioned, I know." "Not old-fashioned at all," he said smoothly, a perfect reassuring smile on his face. But prudence in this market can be a form of risk in itself. The value of your assets is being eroded every single day by inflation." He then began to talk with a vague but impressive-sounding authority, about an exclusive high-yield investment opportunity that he had recently been offered a stake in. He didn't offer me a position directly. He simply spoke of it with a kind of hushed, reverent excitement, as if he were letting me in on a secret from the world of the ultra-wealthy. It's a private equity fund, he explained, specializing in emerging green technologies. The returns are, well, they're staggering, but it's an invitation-only situation. They only deal with a very select, very sophisticated clientele. He was not just trying to sell me on an investment, he was trying to sell me on an identity. He was offering me a chance to be a part of his exclusive, sophisticated world, a world that he knew was so different from my own quiet academic life. It was a classic con man's trick: flatter the mark's intelligence, appeal to their ego, and then offer them a secret exclusive key to a world they don't have access to. I listened, my expression one of polite grandmotherly interest, while my judicial mind took notes. He was good. He was very, very good. And he was, I now knew with an absolute certainty, coming for every single penny I had. I knew that a direct logical rebuttal of his vague impressive-sounding investment pitch would be a mistake. It would reveal my own financial sophistication, a quality that did not fit with the persona of the simple retired judge he had created for me. A direct confrontation would only make him suspicious. I needed a different kind of weapon, a smaller, more subtle tool that would not attack him but would, instead, plant a single tiny and hopefully indelible seed of doubt in my daughter's mind. I had to make Chloe for the first time see a crack in the perfect, flawless facade of the man she adored. I waited for a lull in the conversation, a moment of quiet contemplation as we finished our dessert, and then, with a look of pure innocent and slightly confused curiosity, I turned to Jonathan. "You know, dear," I began, my voice a masterpiece of gentle maternal warmth. "I was thinking about your time in London. You must miss it terribly. Such a beautiful city. Chloe told me you went to the London School of Economics. Is that right? Such a prestigious institution." He smiled. A confident, easy smile. He was on safe ground, recounting a well-rehearsed part of his fictional history. "I did," he said. "A long time ago, I'm afraid, but I loved my time there. A truly formative experience." "I'm sure it was," I said. "I was just reading an article the other day about a wonderful old pub near the university, a place called the Seven Stars. It's been there since the 1600s, apparently. A real piece of history. Did you ever go there?" It was a small, simple, and seemingly innocent question, but it was a question based on a very specific and very verifiable piece of information that Aisha and I had confirmed just hours before. The Seven Stars was, indeed, a real historic pub, and it was, indeed, located just a few steps from the London School of Economics. It was a beloved, legendary institution, a place that any student who had actually attended the university would have known as well as their own name. Jonathan did not flinch. He did not hesitate. He was a master of improvisation. "The Seven Stars," he said, a look of fond, nostalgic recognition on his face. "Of course, a bit of a tourist trap if I'm being honest, but we all went there a few times. A classic. It was a perfect lie, plausible, confident, and utterly, completely false. And I did not challenge it. I did not correct him. I simply let the lie hang in the air between us. And then, I allowed a small, almost imperceptible frown to crease my brow. I looked at him with a new, slightly puzzled expression. "That's funny," I said, my voice a soft, musing sound. "My old colleague, Judge Abernathy, his daughter went there as well, a few years before you, and she said the same thing. She said it was so overrun with tourists that none of the real students ever went there." I let the contradiction, the small, seemingly insignificant inconsistency, settle in the quiet of the room, and then, I simply smiled, a warm, gentle smile, and I changed the subject, moving on to a lighter, more pleasant topic. But for a fleeting, almost invisible moment, I had seen the look in my daughter's eyes. It was not suspicion, it was not doubt, it was something far, far smaller. It was a flicker of pure, unadulterated, and deeply uncomfortable confusion. It was the look of a person who has just heard a single, dissonant note in the middle of a beautiful, perfect symphony. It was a crack. A tiny, almost invisible hairline crack in the flawless foundation of her faith in him. And I knew in that moment that it was a crack I could and would eventually break wide open. After dinner I pleaded a headache, a plausible excuse for a woman of my age, and I made my escape. The drive from their house was not back to my own quiet, peaceful sanctuary. It was to the stark, modern, and brilliantly lit offices of Aisha Clarke's law firm. This was no longer just a personal crisis, it was a legal one, and I needed to move from surveillance to strategy. Aisha was waiting for me, a pot of strong black coffee already brewing. The conference room, a place of sleek, minimalist furniture and panoramic views of the glittering nighttime city, became our war room. The mood was not one of panic but of a cold, focused and deeply professional fury. "He's good, Aisha," I said, my voice a low, grim acknowledgement of my enemy's skill. "He's a true professional. He's patient, he's charming and his lies are seamless. He's already made his first move." I recounted the entire surreal dinner conversation, from his vague, impressive-sounding investment pitch, to his smooth, plausible lie about the pub in London. Aisha listened, her expression growing more grim with each detail. "He's following the classic playbook," she said, her voice tight with a new, urgent anger. "Establish trust, create a sense of financial anxiety, present himself as the sole exclusive solution, and then isolate the target from her legitimate advisors. You are the target, Evelyn, and his next move will be to try to get you to sign something." She then turned to her laptop and projected a file onto the large screen at the end of the conference room. This was the full, ugly and devastating fruit of her private investigator's work. For the next hour, I looked at the real life of the man my daughter had married. It was a gallery of ghosts. There was a marriage certificate from Houston, Texas, under the name of David Allen, to a wealthy, recently widowed surgeon. There was a photo of him smiling at a charity event in San Diego under the name of Richard Shaw, his arm around a successful tech entrepreneur. There was another marriage license from New York, this one under the name of Michael Vance, to an art gallery owner. The names were different, the women were different, but the pattern was identical. Each marriage had lasted approximately 2 years, and each one had ended with the woman in a state of complete and utter financial ruin. The file contained copies of lawsuits, of bankruptcy filings, of restraining orders. It was a paper trail of a life spent in the systematic and ruthless destruction of women. Seeing the faces of his other victims, seeing the cold hard proof of his predatory history, solidified my resolve into a thing of pure, unadulterated steel. This was not just about protecting my own fortune, this was about justice. This was about stopping a monster before he could destroy another life. But my primary duty, my most sacred obligation, was to my own daughter, and the terrible paradoxical truth was that to save her I had to be willing to destroy her happiness first. "We have to show her this, Aisha," I said, my voice a low, pained whisper. "She has to see this." Aisha shook her head, her expression a mixture of professional caution and a deep, personal sympathy. "Not yet, Evelyn," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "Right now she is a true believer. If we show her this, she will see it not as proof of his guilt, but as proof of our conspiracy against him. He will tell her it's all a forgery, a desperate attempt by her jealous mother to ruin her marriage, and she will believe. We have only one shot at this. We have to create a situation where his guilt is so undeniable, so absolute, that even she in her love cannot deny it. We have to make her a witness to her own husband's crime." And so, in the late, quiet hours of the night, in that brilliantly lit war room high above the sleeping city, we devised our trap. It was a plan that was both simple in its concept and profoundly gut-wrenchingly difficult in its execution. It was a plan that would require me to lie to my own daughter to feign a weakness I did not feel, and to walk, willingly, into the very center of the predator's snare. The plan was this. I would call Jonathan. I would pretend that his words at dinner had had their intended effect, that I was now worried about my finances and intrigued by his exclusive investment opportunity. I would agree to invest a substantial sum of money, a sum so large that his greed would override any lingering caution or suspicion. The sum we chose was $2 million. It was a number that was both large enough to be an irresistible bait, and small enough to be a plausible amount for a retired judge to have in liquid assets. The second part of the plan was to control the environment of the transaction. I would insist as a cautious, old-fashioned investor that the final signing of the paperwork take place in a neutral professional location, and there was no more perfect location than the conference room of my own trusted and brilliant lawyer. I would frame it as a simple procedural necessity. My lawyer, I would explain, had to review all of my financial contracts. It was a non-negotiable part of my estate plan. Jonathan, confident in his own powers of persuasion and in the fraudulent nature of his own documents, would see no threat in this. He would see it as a final, bureaucratic hurdle to be easily cleared on his way to his multi-million-dollar payday. The final, and most crucial part of the plan was to ensure that Chloe was a witness. I would have to convince my own daughter to be in that room, to sit at that table and to watch as the man she loved attempted to defraud her own mother. This was the part of the plan that made my stomach clench with a cold, sick dread. The pain that this would inflict upon her was a weight I could barely stand to contemplate. But I knew, with a mother's terrible and absolute certainty, that it was the only way. The truth, when it came, could not come from me. It had to come from him. She had to see the monster for herself. The strategy was set. The trap was designed. All that was left was for me to find the courage to bait it with my own and my daughter's heart. The phone call to Jonathan was the most difficult and most repugnant performance of my life. I made the call the next morning. My voice a carefully constructed mixture of grandmotherly warmth and a new, slightly anxious financial insecurity. Ayesha was on the line with me, listening silently, a quiet, supportive presence in the cold, clinical reality of our plan. I told Jonathan that I had been thinking all night about our conversation. I told him that he was right, that my judicial pension was not keeping up with the modern world, and that I was, for the first time in my life, feeling a little scared. I could also hear the triumphant, predatory smile in his voice as he listened. I was swimming right into his net. "Evelyn, I am so glad you called," he said, his voice a smooth, reassuring purr. "I was so worried about you." I told Chloe, I said, "Your mother is such a brilliant woman, but the financial world has changed so much. We have to help her protect herself." I then, with a feigned and slightly embarrassed reluctance, took the bait. I told him that I was interested, very interested in his investment opportunity. I told him that I had $2 million in a long-term investment that had just matured, and that I was looking for a place to put it to work. His excitement, which he tried and failed to conceal, was a palpable thing, a greedy, electric hum on the other end of the line. We agreed to a meeting for the following afternoon. I then laid the final piece of the trap. I told him that my lawyer, a brilliant young woman named Ayesha Clark, would need to be present, and that the meeting would need to take place in her office. "It's just a formality," I said, my voice a little apologetic. "She's a stickler for the rules. She has to review everything I sign. It's part of the trust she set up for me." Jonathan, so close to his prize that he could taste it, agreed without a moment's hesitation. He saw a small, bureaucratic hurdle. He had no idea he was agreeing to meet his own executioner. The conversation with my daughter was, as I had known it would be, even harder. I called her an hour later, my voice now full of a new and completely fabricated excitement. "Chloe, sweetheart," I began, my voice a little breathless, "I have the most wonderful news. I had a long talk with Jonathan this morning, and I've decided to take him up on his wonderful investment idea. I'm going to invest with him." The silence on the other end of the line was, for a moment, complete. And then Chloe's voice, when it came, was a sound of pure, unadulterated joy. "Mom, oh my gosh, that's amazing. I knew you'd come around. I knew you'd see how brilliant he is." Her happiness was a sharp, painful knife in my heart. She saw this not as a financial transaction, but as a symbol of my final, absolute acceptance of the man she loved. She saw it as the healing of the last, unspoken rift in our family. "And sweetheart," I continued, the words tasting like ash in my mouth, "I want you to be there. The meeting is tomorrow, at Ayesha's office. I want you to be there to witness it, to be a part of this new chapter of trust between your husband and me." "Of course, Mom," she said, her voice thick with a happy, grateful emotion. "I wouldn't miss it for the world." I hung up the phone, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I allowed myself to weep. I wept for the happy, innocent, and trusting daughter I was about to lose, and I wept for the heartbroken, shattered, and betrayed woman she was about to become. The trap was set, the bait was taken, and my own beloved daughter was the lamb I was now, with a heavy and terrible heart, leading to the slaughter. The conference room at Ayesha's law firm was a place of cold, minimalist elegance. It was a stage, and it had been perfectly set for the final, devastating act of our play. We had chosen the largest conference room, a space with a massive, polished mahogany table and a breathtaking panoramic view of the city. We wanted him to feel powerful, to feel like he was in his element, a master of the universe about to close the biggest deal of his life. Ayesha and I were there first, sitting on one side of the table, a single slim file folder in front of us. I was dressed in a simple conservative suit, the very picture of a prudent, retired judge. Ayesha was a vision of sharp, corporate power, her presence radiating an aura of calm and absolute competence. Chloe arrived next, her face alight with a happy, excited glow. She kissed my cheek and then gave Ayesha a warm, friendly hug. She was so happy, so proud, so completely and blissfully unaware of the devastating drama she was about to star in. She saw this as a family affair, a beautiful, harmonious blending of her two worlds. She had no idea she was a witness at an execution. Jonathan arrived last, 5 minutes late, a deliberate power move. He strode into the room with the easy, confident swagger of a man who knows he has already won. He was dressed in a flawless, expensive suit, a leather briefcase in his hand. He kissed his wife, he gave me a warm, conspiratorial smile, and he shook Aisha's hand with a firm, confident grip. He was a predator, and he was so consumed by the thought of his impending victory that he had completely failed to notice that he had just walked into a cage. He sat down opposite us and opened his briefcase with a flourish. He pulled out a thick, professionally bound investment prospectus, a document that I knew was a masterpiece of fraudulent, meaningless jargon. He slid it across the table towards me. "Here we are, Evelyn," he said, his voice a smooth, triumphant purr. "The key to your new and much more profitable future." I picked up the document and pretended to look it over, my brow furrowed in a look of deep concentration. Chloe watched me, her face a picture of proud, wifely devotion. After a few long, tense moments, I finally looked up and gave a small, decisive nod. "It all looks very impressive, Jonathan," I said, and then I turned to Aisha. "Aisha, would you mind taking a look? Just to be sure." Aisha gave a small, professional smile. She took the document and began to look it over, her expression one of deep and practiced, legal scrutiny. Jonathan sat back in his chair, a look of smug, tolerant amusement on his face. He was not worried. He knew that the document was a work of art, a legally meaningless but impressive-looking piece of fiction. And then, the trap was sprung. Aisha finished her review, closed the folder and looked directly at Jonathan. Her smile was gone, replaced by an expression of cool and deeply unsettling professional curiosity. "Before my client signs this, Mr. Turner," she said, her voice as calm and as sharp as a scalpel, "or should I say Mr. Allen, as you were known in Texas, I have a few other documents that I think your wife might be interested in reviewing." The shift in the atmosphere of the room was instantaneous and absolute. The name Mr. Allen hung in the air, a small, quiet and utterly catastrophic explosion. Jonathan's confident, triumphant smile did not just falter, it evaporated as if it had never been there at all. The color drained from his face, leaving behind a pale, waxy mask of pure, unadulterated shock. His body, which had been a picture of relaxed, confident power, went rigid, his hands gripping the arms of his chair. He stared at Aisha, his mouth slightly agape, his eyes wide with the look of a man who has just seen a ghost. Chloe, who had been basking in the warm glow of her husband's success, was the last to react. She looked from Aisha's cold, hard expression to her husband's suddenly terrified face, her own expression a mask of pure, uncomprehending confusion. "Mr. Allen," she repeated, her voice a small, questioning sound. "Aisha, what are you talking about? Who is Mr. Allen?" Aisha did not answer her, she did not even look at her. Her gaze was locked onto Jonathan, a cold, unblinking and utterly merciless stare. And then, with a slow, deliberate movement that was filled with a sense of immense and terrible dramatic weight, she reached for the slim, unassuming file folder that had been sitting in front of her the entire time. She opened it, and she slid it, not to me, not to Jonathan, but directly across the polished mahogany table to my daughter. "I think you should take a look at this, Chloe," she said, her voice quiet, but imbued with a new and deeply compassionate sadness. Chloe looked at the folder as if it were a venomous snake. She looked at her husband, her eyes pleading for an explanation, for a denial, for some reassurance that this was all just a terrible, insane mistake. But Jonathan said nothing. He was frozen, a statue of guilt, his mind clearly scrambling and failing to find an escape from a trap he had not even seen. With a trembling hand, Chloe reached out and opened the folder. The first page was a marriage certificate from Houston, Texas. The groom's name was Daniel Allen. The bride was a wealthy surgeon. Tucked behind the certificate was a photograph, a candid shot from the wedding. It showed the happy couple, and the groom, smiling at the camera, was her husband. It was Jonathan. She let out a small, choked, disbelieving gasp. She flipped to the next page. Another marriage certificate, this one from San Diego, California. The groom's name was Richard Shaw. The bride was a tech entrepreneur. The attached photograph showed the same man, her husband, his arm around a different, smiling woman. Page after page, the evidence mounted. A marriage in New York, under the name of Michael Vance. A lawsuit from a woman in Florida, accusing him of fraud and theft. A newspaper clipping about a mysterious, charming stranger who had swindled a group of wealthy widows in Chicago. It was a complete and utterly damning secret history, a life of predatory, systematic deception, all laid out in the cold, dispassionate language of legal documents and public records. She looked up from the folder, her face a shattered, unrecognizable mask of pure, heartbreaking devastation. The woman she loved, the man she had built her life with, the future she had so happily, so trustingly embraced, it was all a lie, a complete and total and monstrous lie. She looked at the man sitting beside her, at his pale, sweating and terrified face, and she saw him for the first time, not as her loving, brilliant husband, but as a stranger, a dangerous and terrifying stranger. "Who are you?" she whispered, her voice a raw, broken sound, the sound of a heart and a world, shattering into a million irreparable pieces. The aftermath of that terrible, necessary confrontation was not a moment of triumphant, cinematic justice. It was a quiet, ugly, and deeply painful affair. With his con so completely and so publicly exposed, Jonathan did not rage, he did not deny, he simply collapsed. The charming, confident, and powerful man my daughter had married evaporated before our very eyes, leaving behind a small, pathetic, and terrified stranger. He did not speak, he simply sat there, his head in his hands, as the full, catastrophic weight of his own ruin settled upon him. Aisha, who had with a grim and professional foresight already alerted the authorities, made a quiet, discreet phone call. A few minutes later, two plainclothes detectives entered the conference room. The arrest was a quiet, almost anticlimactic event. There were no sirens, no shouted commands, just the quiet, final click of handcuffs, and the sight of the man who had been my son-in-law being led away, his shoulders slumped in a posture of absolute and total defeat. My focus, in that moment, was not on him, it was on my daughter. Chloe was in a state of profound catatonic shock. She had not cried, she had not screamed. She had simply sat there staring at the empty chair where her husband had been, her face a blank, unreadable mask. The beautiful, vibrant, and joyful woman I had known had been replaced by a hollow, empty shell. The pain of seeing her like that was a physical thing, a deep, aching wound in my own heart that was far more painful than any of his lies or her betrayals had been. The victory, if one could call it that, felt like a profound and terrible loss. I had saved my daughter, yes, but I had been forced to destroy her world to do it. The days and weeks that followed were a blur of quiet, painful, and necessary work. The legal fallout from Jonathan's arrest was a complex and messy affair, a tangle of lawsuits from his past victims, and a new federal investigation into his long and storied career as a predator. Aisha handled it all with her usual brilliant competence, shielding Chloe and me from the worst of the legal and media storm that erupted. But the true and most difficult work was the slow, painstaking process of healing my daughter's shattered heart. She moved back into my home, into the familiar, safe space of her childhood bedroom. For the first few weeks, she barely spoke. She moved through the house like a ghost, her eyes empty, her spirit broken. I did not push her, I did not offer her empty platitudes or easy answers. I simply was there. I made her tea, I cooked her favorite meals, I sat with her in the long silent evenings, the quiet steady presence of a mother's unconditional love, a silent testament to the one true and unshakable thing that was left in her world. Slowly, painstakingly she began to emerge from the fog of her grief and her shock. The silence gave way to tears, and the tears, eventually, gave way to words. She talked for hours, for days, exorcising the poison of his lies, trying to make sense of the profound and devastating betrayal. I listened, I held her, and I gently, patiently, helped her to see that his crimes were not a reflection of her own foolishness, but of his own monstrousness. My greatest role, I realized, was not in dispensing justice from the bench. It was here, in the quiet, sacred space of my own home, in the simple and profound act of helping my own child to heal. It was the hardest and most important case of my entire life. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.